This training by the Capital Area Coalition on Homelessness is about how to enter a homeless client who is part of a target population into a coordinated entry assessment referral process in the Homeless Management Information System for Harrisburg and Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, Continuum of Care PA 501. The Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, is Client Point, Medaware Information Systems, Bowman. This training occurred in October 2017. A Coordinated Entry Assessment and Referral, or CEAR, is our Continuum's coordinated entry triage process to place certain persons who are homeless who are considered target populations into, or rather onto, a housing prioritized list. There are three target populations: those who are chronically homeless, those who are unsheltered who may or may not be chronically homeless, and then persons who are minors or transitional age youth, ages 18 to 24, who are unaccompanied, meaning they're not with a parent or a guardian. Coordinated Entry Assessment and Referral, CEAR, involves a team. The CEAR team is comprised of all the housing and outreach agencies in our continuum. An agency in the CEAR team administers CEAR assessments to candidates, i.e. those who are in the target homeless population, and by so doing it automatically places that candidate onto the housing priority list. The CEAR team also conferences regularly to assess that candidate's placement into housing. And finally, any housing agency in the CEAR team, whenever they have an opening, goes first to the housing priority list and places whoever is on that list before they place anybody else. If you're doing a CEAR assessment and entering it into HMIS for a client, it is because you're the temporary assigned agency, or TAA, for that client. Your agency automatically is the TAA if it is a shelter and has a resident who is eligible in that CEAR target population. Yours is also automatically a TAA if your program is a housing program and a CEAR eligible applicant who is also eligible for your housing comes to apply to you. In both cases, you would automatically do the CEAR assessment for that client and enter that assessment into HMIS. Finally, your organization may also be a TAA for various eligible referrals by the community that comes to the Capital Area Coalition on Homelessness. This training assumes that you already know how to create and enter a client into CACH's HMIS. For information on how to do so, it can be found on YouTube at the following link. The first 3 minutes of that video covers how to create a new client in Bowman Service Point, and after you've done that, you are then able to enter that client in Bowman Service Point in the CEAR process. So for the purposes of this training, I've created a new client, and her name is Any Example, and we're going to enroll her then into the CEAR process in our HMIS. The first step is to add a release of information so that the client will be visible in HMIS to all agencies. So we'll go to this tab called ROI, or Release of Information. Add Release of Information. It is important in this process and in all other fields that when you click on Provider, it is not your own provider, but, and we'll hit Search, a provider called CACH CEAR, which is an agency that we created for the CEAR process. So we'll click the Add button and Release Granted, yes. So that visibility is ongoing, we'll put an end date far into the future. Save and release information. We're now ready for step 2, which is to create the CEAR entry assessment. We will go to the Entry Exit tab in the HMIS and click Add Entry Exit. 2 fields to be aware of: Provider. The provider must always in this process be a program that we created called CACH CEAR, Program 100. To look for it, you will use the search function under that field. The next field to be aware of is the type of program, in which case we will choose HUD. So we'll go to the Entry Exit tab, click on Add Entry Exit. For the provider, it cannot be your agency. You use the search function, and you pick CACH CEAR, the provider agency that we created for this process. For the type, we select HUD. And that brings up the CEAR assessment for the client. Now we're ready to fill out the CEAR assessment, and it is always important that you fill out the active field. And here is the active field, and we will choose yes. It is important to click on that field as it places the client onto the housing wait list. So for the sake of time, I went ahead and filled out all the pertinent information on the CEAR assessment, and the questions are very self-explanatory. A few things to pay attention. The reason we ask for the number of in household as well as their gender, age, and relationship to head of household is so that we can understand the type of configuration of housing and bedrooms, apartment types that the family may or may not need. In this example, she is just a single, and relationship to herself as head of household is self. Her gender is female and 31. Another important thing is to check the type of target population that she is, and in her case it is unsheltered, not chronically homeless. We also ask for the total monthly income and whether they have received rental assistance from HELP or rental assistance at any time in the past 3 years. And those questions are to ascertain whether the client is an eligible candidate for rapid rehousing. The next step in the process is to complete the Vulnerability Index sub-assessments. There are 3 Vulnerability Index sub-assessments. There is a Vulnerability Index or VI SPDAT for unaccompanied singles. There is one for transitional age youth called the TAY SPDAT. And then there's one for families called the VIF SPDAT. And that includes families of transitional age youth. So if there is a transitional age youth who comes with their own children, you would not use the TAY SPDAT on that family, but the family SPDAT. So here are the 3 different sub-assessments for Vulnerability Index. The VI SPDAT for singles, the VIF SPDAT for families, and the TAY VI SPDAT for transitional age youth. Since she is a single, we will add and do a VI SPDAT for singles, and that is how it looks like. It will ask questions on the history of housing and homelessness, risk factors, socialization, daily functioning, wellness, and then at the end it will give you a calculation. And for the sake of brevity, I filled out the person's vulnerability index, and it gave her a calculation of 7. Click on Save, and it adds the sub-assessment to her CEAR case review assessment. The next important step in filling out a client's CEAR assessment is to choose an appropriate housing intervention so that the client will appear on the priority housing list for review by the CEAR team. So going back to the CEAR case review assessment, we go past the VI SPDATs, and there we see the questions about type of planned housing intervention. So based on her type of homelessness, which is unsheltered, not chronically homeless, we can pick the type of housing intervention that best suits her. There's transitional housing for unsheltered, for instance. However, if you do not know, always pick Other. because that will at least place her onto the housing wait list, so that when the CEAR case review team meets, they will be able to best determine the type of housing for her and based on her type of homelessness, and they will be able to change that on the CEAR assessment. Likewise, leave housing interventions 2 and 3 blank for the CEAR case review team to fill out. We are now done with the initial filling out of the CEAR assessment. The next thing that you will need to be aware of is how to access the CEAR housing wait list. This is for whenever your agency has housing openings, you're supposed to go to the housing priority wait list first in order to place anybody on that list before you place anybody else. Or, as an agency, you are doing a CEAR case review with other agencies on the applicants that are on the housing wait. In order to do that, we go to the Home button, and there you will have a report called an ART report that has the CEAR housing wait lists and also the CEAR case review. In case you do not have that report on your home list, there is a instruction guidance on the system news window that will teach you how to create those lists on your home page. So to access that housing wait list, click on View Entire Report, and that brings up the report. It'll ask you to run a query so that the report will populate with all the individuals that are in the CEAR list. However, for privacy's sake, since we do have individuals in this HMIS, we're going to hit Cancel for this demonstration. But you can see there the different fields of the assessment that are listed in a table, and underneath it there are tabs for the different types of housing interventions that that client would be placed in, including other housing. Clients are prioritized first by the homeless score in their VI SPDAT, then by the order of chronology based on the date of their application, and then finally by the total VI SPDAT score. So when you have an opening in your housing program, you'll need to pick the appropriate housing that your program falls under and pick the first person to interview that's on the list, going down from there for other housing opening. The next step is updating a client's CEAR record. Whenever you update a client's record, always backdate to the original date of entry so that you're using their original record. So going back to any examples record, we go to Entry Exit. We see the CACH CEAR record there. But before we do anything, we go to the back date and change it to the entry date of 10/15/2017. That changes this to a yellow color so that we know we have successfully backdated. We hit the Edit Entry icon, and now we can update her CEAR assessment. The final steps are closing out the client and CEAR. The first part is to make the CEAR assessment inactive. Again, always backdate to the original date of entry. Then change the active status field to inactive. Fill out the next field, which asks for the reason why inactive. And then finally fill out the housing information, for presumably the person is inactive because he or she found housing or decided he or she did not want any services. So we already backdated. We can click on the edit, and we change the active to inactive, the reason they found housing, and then we fill out the housing questions. The final step is to close the client out of the CEAR program entirely. This is done in Entry Exit, clicking on the Edit Exit Date, choosing the reason for leaving and the destination, and you've successfully exited from the program.